the Zoom. Really exciting. Just from the last, our relationships conversation last week. It was awesome, super awesome, and we had a lot of good feedback from our people that were on, and they really enjoyed it. So looking forward to more wisdom and following up with you guys on some of these questions. And I'll keep this short so we can hear all this wisdom. All right, so we're going to get started. I'm just going to start with a word of prayer, and then we'll get going. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for all that you do. Thank you that we're all able to be here. Once again, thank you for Uncle Hen and Auntie Nerissa being willing to serve and add value, even with their 6 kids and a lot going on in life, whatever it might be. Thank you for just speaking through them, and I hope this can add value and bless other people. And I pray, amen. All right, let's get going. All right, so our first question that we got was, what are some of the struggles in interracial marriages and with raising kids?
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us, Youth and Braden. You look amazing, as always. Look at that smile. Man. This is also the first time in several months that Nur and I don't have the kids here. So we want to thank you for this time, and we'll see you next week. That's it. That's all the time I need. We're good. So thank you for that question. Maybe I want to start by saying that we live in Vancouver, right? And Vancouver has the highest percentage in Canada of interracial couples. And I think most of the couples on this call are interracial couples as well. So that's pretty exciting. Now, I know Nerissa's parents were probably hoping for an Asian guy. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty sure that was the case, because we do come from very different cultures. I'm Dutch. Nerissa is a Hong Kong Chinese, and I think during the whole dating process, you have to figure out if you're willing to put up with the differences, because we are coming from 2 very different cultures. So the dating process is for you to figure out if you like it or not. And in my opinion, if you don't like it, like if I wouldn't like Nerissa's parents, if that is a deal breaker, it has to be a deal breaker before getting married, because once you're married, you have no right to complain about it. It's kind of like you marry a smoker, and then after being married for 2 years, I want you to quit smoking because I don't want to be married to a smoker. Well, you probably should have figured that out before you got married, right? So for us, the interracial marriage, I was coached by Esmond and Marianne on how to date properly, and Phil and Candace as well. And I was encouraged to ask Nerissa's dad to take Nerissa on a date, which was really weird for me to do that. And I think it was really weird for Nerissa's dad as well. But at the same time, it showed character and respect. And I think that crosses racial boundaries. And on the child raising part of it, interracial children, we got Dutch Chinese kids. I don't think we're fully qualified to talk about this yet because we're still rookies in that area. We can say more when our kids are adults, but we do focus on having a relationship with God for our kids, but that starts with us. That starts with me. But the benefits of interracial is that the kids get an opportunity now to learn the North American culture. They get to learn their European, their Dutch culture, and they get to learn their Chinese culture, which I think is very beneficial.
Awesome. Yeah, I would just add to what Harold is saying is, I know Harold said Harold says that we come from 2 very different cultures, Dutch and Chinese. I believe that it's only obvious because we're different shades. Right, as in, and I've alluded to this even during the YNA, the first part, where, I've met other Chinese guys who were less Chinese than Harold, even though they look 100% Chinese. And what I mean by that is the way they were raised in their families, their parents they didn't have the same values as I was raised with. So I would have more conflict and issues and have different conversations with them than with Harold. meaning, and I alluded to this, where, you know, Harold's mom, she looked after Harold's great grandma and then his grandma before they both passed, and then his great aunt as well before she passed. And so he watched that growing up. So it's normal for him to see the next generation taking care of the last generation. And that's something I grew up with, going, yeah, it's totally normal. Like, we're responsible. It's our responsibility to take care of the previous generations, to make sure they end well. And it's something where now I don't have to fight him or convince him, because when we talk about it, he's like, yeah, that makes total sense. I'm like, yeah, it does. And we can just work on equipping and building our resources so that we can take care of the previous generations as they need more and more support and help, right? So it's a different conversation. And so I believe it's the same challenges, whether you're interracial or pure, I don't know what they're called, but or if you're dating the same kind or not the same kind. It's just a matter of having the conversations. It almost makes it either easier or not, or more obvious to have the conversations, because we're different shades, right? Like, the language is a big one, but at the same time, like Harold said, we're all in Canada, so we all speak some level of English. Maybe our parents don't. That would be the biggest challenge or obstacle or barrier moving forward, just for the families to get together and for the families to get to know each other. But I know my parents, like when Harold alluded to that, that was the first objective they brought up, was that you know, our family doesn't speak Chinese. I go, we're a British colony. All our families in Hong Kong speak some level of English. And it was just funny how my dad was using something, like the most obvious thing, just to be like, I don't think this is going to work out for the family. I'm like, but as much as he's marrying into the family, I'm the one committing to Harold for the rest of my life, right? And yeah.
Maybe one last comment. I figured out fairly quick what obviously Nerissa's love languages, as well as Nerissa's parents. So I may not be able to speak Chinese very well yet. I can speak the 5 love languages, so I figured out what their love languages and served them in their language, and been able to build a healthy relationship with them.
And specifically, I would say Harold speaks the 5 love language to the Asian version, which is in food and in service. Right, and even and he's incorporated physical touch. It's not as awkward when a white guy comes in to hug your Chinese parents, because Chinese people don't really hug, but they do love it. You can see it on their face. My parents love it when Harold does give them a hug. So I say Harold's definitely done a great job in adjusting and transitioning that into the different cultures.
Thank you, guys. That was awesome. So that made a lot of sense. Moving on to our next question. How difficult was it for you guys in your new relationship, going back to when you guys were dating, to not bring in bad habits from your past relationships?
It's hard to get rid of old habits, but you can definitely form new habits, which is something that I've been working on, building these new habits, and to focus on only looking forward, where I believe that the principles, the precepts of Christianity, you know, the principles, the precepts that we say we believe in, I truly believe that these are life-changing, and I believe that because I've experienced it. These are life-changing principles, and they have changed. They've been changing lives for thousands of years, and this is just my personal opinion. I haven't really spent too much time looking at research, but I believe that you can pretty much take any 2 people in the world, put them together, and they can have a successful marriage if they live by the principles, you know, where it's not about you, like cute as you may be, right? It's not about you. It's about the principles. Like, you're supposed to live by them, and then find someone else who also lives with them, and that's how you can really build it. And it's not about just some magical thing.
Yeah, what I would add to what Harold is saying is just, it was definitely extremely difficult to break old habits, because it was definitely a habit for us, having been friends with benefits for over 2 years. We did a lot of things that was comfortable and felt nice at the time, but that was not, that was destroying our relationship, or destructive, I would say. And so, but like everything else, breaking a habit is hard, and at the same time, creating a new habit takes time. right? And part of it, what we did was to put guardrails in place to help us move into a totally different direction in our relationship. And like Harold said, we had people in place to support us in that. We had rules of like that we, both of us, agreed to, so that we wouldn't, to help us not fall back, or help us not fall back into the old habits. Stuff like, you know, we would meet up only with other people. We would meet up driving in separate cars, so that, you know, it wouldn't be convenient and easy for me to end up at his house, right? It'd be like, no, we're meeting out somewhere with everybody else. And then I'm heading home after that, he's heading home after that. And that helped us create that boundary, the guardrail, so that we could focus on what we needed to. For the time, for us to heal over time, and two, for us to build trust in a healthy way over time between the two of us. So it was definitely hard, but at the same time, I think with the encouragement, and also just having, like Harold said, Esmond and Mare, Phil and Candace kind of kicking us in the butt to like pointing out the obvious stuff that sometimes even for example, our parents, I know that's coming up, but even like our parents wouldn't necessarily say, in our case, because my parents weren't involved in our relationship until we were married, and that's just what they chose. Actually, they're still not very involved. We just were more involved in their lives now that we're married, I would say. But at the same time, like for us to put people in place so that they could, you know, and we ran our decisions or opportunities that came up, we ran it by, as a Mare, Phil and Candace, and even PC as he got involved towards us looking at getting married. We ran our opportunities by them before we made a decision, to make sure we were headed in the right track. Because just hearing a lot and seeing a lot of what mainstream and how people do relationships everywhere else, all our friends on media and all that, it was easy. We always thought it was obvious, the answer, and some of the times it was obviously the wrong way, and we just didn't realize it was wrong. Just because of how relationships are now not built. People fall into different stages of relationship. That's how they kind of do their relationships, and hence with the stats. For us, the biggest thing was having the end in mind, knowing that for us, once we believe that, we're like, okay, are we seriously considering being married for life? If we are, then we don't need to worry about the short-term gratification, the short-term having fun, but let's just put the work in so that our long-term is actually happily together, versus just, let's just do it because we've spent all this time together and invested so much time together as it is. So with that being in mind, it wasn't always fun. I would say the journey was not always fun. Like, I
think Esmond was mean to me.
Which I'm sure nobody is surprised on the Zoom call, but
that was a decision that we made, right? At least for me, I had done it my own way, which was based on lust and feelings before, and then when I decided to include God in the relationship and include wise people, once you make that decision, you can. Well, Esmond told me that I shouldn't go to New York with a girl that I'm not married to. Well, that's ridiculous because it feels so good and it'll be a good time. But, you know, like I had decided beforehand that I was going to listen to input and listen to counsel. So then do you quit when it becomes uncomfortable, or do you commit to the decision that you previously made, right? So I decided to listen, even though I didn't like it. But the old habits, the old way of doing it didn't work. So if you want something to change, then you're going to have to change, and change is difficult, and change is uncomfortable and awkward. And but I had figured out what doesn't work. So I wanted to change. I wanted to create these new habits. And anytime you do something new, it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be annoying, and you're going to get frustrated. But once that decision is made, you have to stick to it, right?
And honestly, what Harold just said, as the girl watching him, I was hurt for a second, but I was kind of curious at the same time. And because of our past and our patterns, I was like, okay, maybe he really is changing. Like maybe something is different with him. And it, as time passed, as it happened, as he followed through with his decision and he didn't waver, I had more trust in him because of that. I was like, oh, he really does mean that. Like, he really mean it when he said he's now a man of Christ. He really meant it when he's like, we're not going to fool around anymore until you're my wife. If God willing, that's what he wants. And it really gave me a greater sense of admire for him as a person, as a man that I'm like, okay, I can see, you know, just a man who's not going to waver, not because of me convincing going, dude, what are you talking about, to anybody else, but he's actually standing on principle. It's not because one man told him. He told me the reason why he uninvited me, and that was huge. So every decision that he made, I watched, and you know, I may not say it at the time, but there's somebody constantly watching, right? And that's why, like you said, Braden, like as we work on ourselves individually first, once you're in a committed relationship and eventually, you know, you're in a lifelong relationship, it's not so foreign to continue to work on yourself so that you can continually grow yourself to better enrich yourself and then enrich the relationship, and hence it will ripple into the kids, right? Because then the kids will see, and the kids constantly see us stretching ourselves as well. I don't want them to see it just as a show. I want them to see it that we're actually doing stuff for ourselves and it's not just because of them, right? And so, yeah, that's what I would add.
Yeah, maybe this last thing. I said Esmond was mean to me, but at the same time, I want to thank Esmond for having that conversation, because I know for someone like Ez, and I know it's the same thing for Phil, these guys, I know 100% that Esmond wanted my life to be better, our life to be better, and that's why Esmond had that conversation with me. And I'm pretty sure Esmond was uncomfortable having that conversation, because I've seen and I felt his hands being cold when he has hard conversations. But that's what a true friend is, right? A true friend will tell you what needs to be said with the risk of losing the relationship. But I chose to listen, and now I get an opportunity to say thank you, Ez, for that conversation, because we wouldn't be sitting here today with our 3 kids. Well, our 3 kids are across the street, but we wouldn't have 3 kids and we wouldn't be married if it wasn't for that conversation.
And to add to that, the reality is most people are not receptive to this kind of slap in the face when you're going the wrong way. Our story is not special, but most people are not willing to do what we've done, to make the decisions we have. It's an illusion to think they're like, oh yeah, Nerissa and Harold made it, so we're going to make it too, because they slept together before marriage, and look at them now, they're married now. But we're like, you missed all the parts in between. Mm-hmm. And when we share that, they tend to glaze over that. And that's what we're finding, right? Like, it's not, so you do have to work on it as individually, but both parties have to want it, and to want to make it work and put the effort in order for it to work.
Thank you, guys. You guys are literally like lighting up my paper right now. I'm just lighting it up. Going through some of the notes I took down, which was really awesome. That statement is key when you said, Uncle, if you want different results, something has to change. So you can't enter into a relationship with being the same person from your last relationship, or having the same bad habits from your last relationship, if you want to have an amazing relationship next. And key, when bad habits kick in, it's okay to uninvite, how you uninvited Auntie from New York. And then also, it's more sexy when you stand on principles. All right, boom. You know what I mean? So let's go on to our next question here. How involved, right back to your dating process, how involved were your parents in your dating process? And I know you guys talked on it a little bit, but would you like to expand?
Sure. My parents weren't involved in our dating process at all. Not because I don't like my parents. And my parents actually had their 50th wedding anniversary yesterday. So that's pretty exciting. That's very exciting. So like, I can definitely learn from my parents, but I didn't include them in the dating process because our the vision for our life and how we live our lives is different. My mom straight up encourages us to have sex before marriage. Like that was actually a conversation.
She pulled me aside, and I think she came for a visit one of the times before we were married, and she was basically, in my head, coming from a family that's never had sex talk openly. I'm like, is this lady telling me that she's okay with me having sex with her son before marriage? I'm like, oh, this is just awkward. It's not even just a sex talk, but like the awkward, not appropriate. I'm like, oh, maybe this is how the Dutch do things. I don't know.
Keep in mind, Holland is probably one of the most liberated countries in the world. We don't have a lot of age restrictions for a lot of stuff. So it's just a different culture, right? It goes back to the interracial thing, you know, like me being Dutch, where everything is out in the open. Like everything is out in the open with everybody. There's not a lot of secrets. Where the Asian culture, it's just different, right?
It's all about having face. Yeah. Having face. You don't talk as in like you want to look good, smell good. You don't put out any of your dirty laundry. You don't talk about politics. Don't talk about money. Don't talk about religion. Like just be polite. Basically, is how they portray or we portray ourselves.
So my parents weren't involved in the dating process, but I did choose this time to be 100% honest with my parents, where in my previous relationship, my parents didn't like the girl. So what that meant was I would tell my mom and dad a lie every time I went out, telling them I was going to meet with a buddy when really I wasn't meeting with a buddy. I was meeting with this girl. So I wasn't honest about anything that I was doing at the time. And that just, you know, you have all these lies and all this stuff that you keep putting in your backpack, and you're carrying this around, and it's weighing you down by lying, and it just, like, eventually your back is going to break and you're going to fall over, right? And then, you know, you better be praying that you have people in your life that are willing to help you get back up. But so I was at least honest with my parents this time, and I was honest with Nerissa's parents as well. You know, like I mentioned, I had asked her dad to take Nerissa out on a date, and I was very clear about my intentions. I knew when it came to asking for their daughter's hand in marriage, I took Nerissa's mom and dad out for lunch. So I took mom and dad out for lunch, and I thought, you know, schedule an hour and a half lunch, that's pretty good, which was a 4.5 hour lunch because dad had a few questions. So anyway, it was a great time. It all worked out clearly.
Yeah, it was. I believe it was 4.5 hours because they've never experienced this before, but they also wanted, I guess, to make the most of the opportunity, and maybe in a way too to test and see if Harold was really open to sharing and talking about anything and everything, whether that is what you know, the permission to ask to marry your daughter, if that's what that whole process is supposed to be like. But because they never built a relationship with him prior to, I believe that was important for them. So the whole, you know, 4.5 hours, they not just talked about, you know, him, what his goals are, if he had any dreams, what his finance statements are, and, you know, that was in chaos, so that was a little hard for him to answer. And they were kind of like, that's a red flag kind of thing. But they asked him everything from politics to his stance on abortion, like just random stuff. And he was a trooper. He totally just took it. My parents didn't even know that it was over 4 hours. I think they went from like a lunchtime. It was pretty much dinner time by the time they left. But yeah, he was a trooper. And again, my parents didn't say a word to me about how that went. I mean, they didn't have to, but my mom shared how they went with him. It's just I didn't get any feedback on what they got out of it from that. But what I believe that led to is now, once we are married, they've been more comfortable asking him questions and more comfortable talking with him. And even so, just to go back to your question about how involved our parents were in the dating process, on my side as well, my parents were not very involved. They didn't, I shouldn't say they didn't want to be, they didn't know how to be. So after Harold asked, and they knew we were officially dating, I kept constantly asking, because I saw it in the Canadian culture, right? I was like, can Harold come have dinner? If we're having it with one of our closest aunties and uncles, can he come so they can meet him and we can all have a conversation? And my parents would be like, oh, no. until he's officially in the family, he doesn't meet anybody. Like, and every time that's what they kept saying. So they wouldn't let him come. And I understand that because that's just what they grew up with, right? So, but every time and they didn't even want him around the house. So I'm like, oh, do you want to have lunch with him? And I don't think we ever had. Yeah, we maybe saw him once or twice, like in passing, they would say a hello, but they didn't want him to hang out at the house. And so that was very different, and it was hard for me in the sense of I wanted them to be more involved. I wanted to get their feedback on red flags they would have seen from him, and a lot of that was because I have heard, you know, from Esamir, Phil, and Candace. I'm like, yeah, I believe that too. I want to have more of the people that I trust and who knows me to, when they see a red flag, for them to have that perspective and to share that with me so that I can address it or at least have that conversation with Harold versus being blindsided by it later down the road. Right. So yeah, so because my parents were involved, we chose, and we alluded to that earlier, just having other couples in our life to be part of it, where we saw fruit on their tree, right? These are couples who actually have, they are happily married. They're not just happily married behind closed doors, but they share that they're happily married, and that they want other couples to be happily married as well. And hence, what that have done for us is to see what that look like, or what it could look like, and what we could incorporate into our relationship so that we could be happily married as well. And that includes everything from, you know, when Esamir, and he shared that before, how they fought in front of us. And for me, coming from a family where my parents never, not that they didn't fight, they would kind of like build up, and then by the morning we'd have breakfast and everything's kind of swept under the rug. So we still felt the tension, but then nobody would ever talk about it. And then if that was ever brought up, even like a few weeks down the road, we all still kind of felt it, but I never knew how things were resolved. And as I got older, when I asked, I always got the, you know, it's none of the kids' business. Like the adults will kind of deal with it, or that, you know, it wasn't something I had to be. It was none of my concern, basically. And so having watched as a mayor fight, and even Phil and Candace having loud discussion, not loud, but like not like just real conversations. It's not always like, hi honey, I'm so glad you're home. Like, it's just not just the fluff. It's shown me that it's okay and it's normal to have those conversations with your spouse, and that it's actually healthier than to not have those, than to think it's always happy and to think that it's always nice and, you know, rainbows and butterflies, if you will, between a husband and wife. And what that has, like, because the first time when I watched as a mayor fought, I was so uncomfortable because I've never sat through anybody fighting, like friends, never mind husband and wives. So I'm like, I should just back out slowly and leave, because it was so awkward. And I don't know if other people feel that, but because like you see it on TV and it's kind of funny. People are throwing things sometimes, they're fighting, sometimes they get physical, or they're just yelling, and it's just so destructive. And I'm like, I don't want to be any of that. Right? But this was something where I'm like, no, seeing how you can actually fight about something with both people having the same, not the same end in mind, but knowing that it's just something to better understand what each person is saying, knowing that the argument could end with both respecting each other's opinions, even if it's different, or that both people could know that it's with the same, not end in mind, but the same direction in mind. It's not a fight that's going to lead to separation. It's not a fight that's going to lead to a breakup. It's a fight to strengthen the relationship, right? And so for me to watch an argument from beginning to end, it was so powerful, and it's elevated my game, or actually I guess it awoken that muscle of me, like not the argument muscle, but the fact that it's healthy and that it's actually good. And it doesn't mean that you're picking a fight, but it's just, you really have strong conversations with people you love and care about, right? We don't just fight with people just for the sake of fighting, unless, you know, and I get that you have that when you're kids and in elementary school, just to learn how to fight. But the only reason you continue to have strong conversations with our kids or with each other, or with people we love, whether it's chosen family or blood family, is because we care and love for them, right? And so that was huge for me, knowing that that is what a healthy relationship looks like. And yeah, at the same time, you know, most of our family members, extended family members, not including our kids, are not on board, not necessarily. They don't have the same values. As most of you know, Harold and I are the only Christians in our families coming in, so us and our kids. And so just having different values with our families, and choosing to do life in a glass house so that we share everything and anything. Like, we've brought up stuff with my parents now, having, when we sit down for meals with them, they get super uncomfortable because they don't even talk about it. And it's not something weird or anything. It's just like, well, we'll just share. I can't even think of why, but we'll just share. Oh, we just had a fight about this. And they'll be like, oh, ha, 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 ha. Like, they get really uncomfortable because they're like, oh, you guys fought? Why are you telling us? And we wanted to share because part of us wanting to be a lighthouse is, not especially, but even for people closest with us, like my parents, they're still together. They're still together. They're not happily together. What I truly pray for is that as we spill what we've learned and we're doing in our relationship, that it'll spill somewhat into theirs so that they could at least end well together. But I don't know if that's I'm not sure how that's gonna go, but I want them to see that it could be different. And I'm at peace with it's their choice, however much they want to implement that into their lives, right? But at the same time, I know as the lighthouse, like we always talk about, until they're hurting enough or wanting it bad enough, whether it's my parents or siblings or our friends even that we were around, like people I went to high school with who have not changed their habits. And they're like, you guys are so weird. Who does premarital counseling? Who does, because everyone knew how we started. So like, what are you guys doing? And then when we got married, they're like, yeah, of course we saw it coming. But a lot of our friends joked and made fun of a lot of what we chose to do. And that's part of, just on a side note, that's part of where we had to filter out some of our friends who were married, who were in longer relationships than we were in, that not to listen to any of what they were saying, right? Because we're like, you don't have what we want. And so that was huge for us to not, and we would talk about that. I'd be like, oh, one of my best friends, I lived with her for 6 years in Toronto when I was in college. We were roommates for 6 years. She was dating one guy then, we made fun of it. I was dating some guy, we made fun of it. We're tight, we talk about anything and everything. And her husband now, like, before when we were doing premarital counseling, I was so excited. I've never learned of premarital counseling. So when we were doing it, I'm like, oh, like, look, we're doing this. And I'm like, and this is what we're doing. I go, it's kind of cool. Have you guys done it? And her first words were, premarital counseling, if you guys have issues, why are you guys even looking at getting married? I'm like, what? That's not what premarital counseling is about. It's kind of like getting your license. Just because you wrote the written test, you don't just automatically know how to drive a car. So you get some guy, an instructor who is certified or who has experience to teach you, and they sit beside you and they walk through everything, and you learn. That's when you learn through learn the mechanics of a car, but then also how to drive, where to drive, and all the different steps of driving. And well, that's what premarital counseling is for marriages. And she's like, you're weird. And that's literally how it stopped. And we stopped talking about it completely, about us doing premarital counseling. And ever since that conversation, she would just, every time she got and she'd make fun of it. So you guys still doing your premarital counseling? I'd be like, yeah. I'm like, wait a minute, I think she's making fun of me. And, we're still friends to this day. It's just, we've never talked about it in that aspect. But Harold and I also recognize, I'm like, they're not Christians. They have chosen to pave their own path, which is fine. Right. And then part of being a lighthouse is, I'm like, no, we need to continue to do what we're doing and stay the strong path, because when crap hits the fan, I'm not praying that it will. I just know life happens. When life happens, I want her to know that we're here, and that's something that we can help shine the light to where they need to go, to whatever, whether it's heal or to strengthen the relationship. For the sake of what we believe for marriages to last and to be together forever, right? So sorry, Braden, I kind of went off on your second question. I just realized that.
No, that's all good. That's all good. Just for myself, just realizing, both of you guys were kind of talking about being more cultural and how your parents weren't involved more due to culture. From my understanding, or just not really wanting to be involved. But realizing what you guys did in that case was you actually placed great examples in your life that you could look upon and get involved in your relationship, just because you didn't have that, have your parents as involved, which was really key. And then just being able to be honest with your parents. And then I like your analogy on premarital counseling, Auntie. It's like getting your license. And just when you do the written test doesn't mean you automatically know how to drive, unless you're like myself. But no, but I'm joking. But going on to the next question, this is a 3-part question. Couples, when dating, have ideals they share and they fall in love. But what adjustments do you make when reality hits after marriage? Is the first question. What would you say to us on how to navigate the ideals to reality, and then before reality sets in, and then also how can we prepare? So if you guys just want to dive into that.
I think it's extremely important to have a clear understanding of what your values are, a clear understanding of what your vision is, what you want to do. Plus, in a healthy marriage, how do I say this? You have to be dead. I know I'm looking at that. You have to be dead. Yeah, you have to be dead, because I believe it's virtually impossible to read the New Testament and to not come away with the overwhelming sense that God wants to kill you. Not the physical you, like put the knife away, but the selfish part of you. You know, there's a scripture verse, Matthew 10:38, that says, "Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me." Luke 17:33 says, "Whoever tries to keep their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life will preserve it." John 15:13, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." So God wants to kill the selfish part of you. God is not there to bless the selfish part of you. And there's no more perfect institution to kill you than marriage. Because you cannot stay selfish and stay married. You cannot stay selfish and stay married. Eventually, one has to give. You know, and in my opinion, marriages fall apart because one or two people become selfish, and that's it. John 12:24 says, "Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed, but if it dies, it produces many seeds." And then, I mean, building a life together takes time. It doesn't just happen overnight. The Bible talks about two becoming one, but to truly become like one unit with one direction and one purpose, you know, that takes time, and sometimes that takes a lot of time. So, like, you know, be patient. Some changes take time, takes a very long time. You know, like on the wedding day, I know I looked at Nerissa, and I'm as she's walking down the aisle, and I'm thinking, man, she's perfect. I hope she never changes, right? But Nerissa is walking up, and she's looking at me, and she's probably thinking, oh, he's pretty great, but he really needs some help, right? And that's why so many men resent their wives, because wives are so often trying to change the man, where oftentimes the guy is not necessarily trying to change his wife, right? So the focus for us has to be God. God has to be the center of it. And that's the only way for us to make it work.
And it's funny how Harold says that about how he hopes I never change, because when we first met, and just before to give you an idea, when we first met, I just graduated from college, so I was at a stage where I was just wanting to. I didn't have a purpose. I was just kind of enjoying life. I just wanted to be free, because I had so many commitments when I was in college. Like, I was in school full time, I was doing varsity track, I was doing 2 to 3 jobs as well. So my schedule was full with stuff and responsibilities I was accountable for. And so I wanted just a time to do nothing or anything and just be reckless, so to speak, before I had to do adulting and do real life, right? That's when we met. And so we were literally, and so Harold says that, like, when we first met, we were literally hanging out, not having much, like, we were not productive at all. Like, the day would pass and we weren't doing anything, right? And when I say anything, we literally could sit in front of a TV for hours, or yeah, we just didn't do anything. Like, we didn't get any stuff done. And looking back, I go, it must have been, I don't know if it is, but it must have been like and not an eye opener, but it must have been I don't know if it's a shocker for Harold to see. Like, it was a shocker for me when we did one of those assessments, the Mark Unger flag page, because I've been convinced as I was learning about myself and getting to know myself that I'm fun country. Like, I'm so much fun. I knew, I'm like, everything I did was so much fun. I know, Candace or Sarah, I see what you're saying, but I had so much fun doing what I was doing, right? So when I learned about all the 4 different flag pages, if you're not aware of it, go look it up. But I was like, I for sure related to the fun flag page, and I'm doing the assessment. I knew 100% it would be my primary or a close secondary, right? So we did it together. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I already know what it is, and we got the results, and I was so upset. I was like, control country. What is this control country? I'm like, where's my fun country? I'm like, it's a far third. It was not even like a second. It was a far third. And I'm like, why is it like, it's so small? Like, it should be way up here. I'm like, all the stuff I chose are fun. I don't really understand what's going on. So I had a hard time discovering myself. Harold thought it was so funny because he's like, it's totally you. I'm like, it's not. I don't really know. And we argued for like the rest of the day. We even went to Eze Mayor's house because I'm like, I don't believe this thing is so wrong. Like, I don't understand. I'm like, I might have to do it again because
Nerissa was trying to control the results of the flag page.
Yes, and so I've accepted the fact that I am more. Okay, you don't all have to clap for this, but I have accepted the fact that I am more control country. But I have fun doing it, and hence I've accepted being like having so much fun being in control. And now I'm right now at the stage. Evan, stop laughing. I'm at the stage right now accepting the fact that I'm also nurturing, because Harold brought this up, that it was brought up in conversation that I'm not nurturing, but that I am nurturing in a tough, loving way. But I believe it's still nurturing. And so anyways, not to dwell on this, but being ESL, I believe that plays a factor. But also as we get to know ourselves, it's kind of a fun way where, what do I want to say? The biggest thing is, you know, Esmond brought this up in one of the group chats, iron sharpens iron, and so let people sharpen people, right? So our ideals in dating, you know, when you're infatuated, be mindful of how the other person is either enabling you or disabling you to grow yourself, and what you let them do, right? And what I mean by that is, because I'm so trying to develop and our connection, am I stopping being myself so that I can eventually get him to put a ring on my finger? Or am I continuing to grow myself, and is he also doing the same thing, so that we can actually be two strong person going in to be a greater not greater person, but two becomes a stronger one greater person, right? Because that was an area where, honestly, for me, because he was so, and I remind myself of this, right? Like, I'm like, yeah, he's always been the laid back, or since I've met him, right? The laid back, more go with the flow. I've seen him ignore
Charming,
yeah.
Good looking,
humble, but also, like, you know, he was the guy that I've seen his bad habits of ignoring calls. Like, this Charm Dommy guy kept calling his phone like over days, and I'm like, why don't you pick it up? It's the same guy who's calling you. And he's like, no, it's fine, I'll talk to him later. And I saw that when we were dating, right? So it's something that I knew that, and, you know, even now, like, when I get frustrated with him, with Harold, on stuff that he's doing now, I have to remind myself that's where he was coming from. So not for him to stay that way, but then for him to identify it for himself, that that's something he needs to change, right? So when I bring it up, I can't let my journey override his journey, right? Even now that we're married. For myself, as we were, like, I was never, and I mentioned this before, I was never the girl that was looking to get married and like have kids and be a stay-at-home mom. I was always scared of saying I do, because one, I wanted it forever. Two, I never saw a forever that was happily forever. So I've long ago decided that I'd rather be alone and happy than forever unhappy with somebody else. So I was totally okay being by myself. When Harold and I started, like, obviously that didn't stop us from being friends with benefits, but I was like, hey, we're not in anything commitment officially together, so that was fine. But as we look towards, and he was talking about marriage, and I'm like, whoa, buddy, just slow down. Part of it, as we were going through that journey, as we started doing premarital counseling with Pastor Colin, I was still uncertain. And it was one moment, I don't know, we weren't actually talking about anything in particular. It was more so Harold. I realized, because in my head, I'm always thinking, how can I do myself better? In my head, I'm going, with my athletic background, I'm willing to be coached in sports. I knew I was willing to be coached in every area of my life. And because we had people in our lives to speak into other areas of our life outside of my athletics, and I was willing to take input, I figured I was okay. But I was like, I don't know about him. And so I was like, I don't know. And, Ez kept going, well, if he asked you now, would you say yes? And I kept hesitating because I was like, no, I really wouldn't, because I still don't know. And it wasn't until we were sitting with Pastor Colin, we were going through different things, everything from Harold's willingness to go to a counselor because he was married before. He was willing to go to a counselor to make sure he had no baggage from that previous relationship so that he wouldn't bring any of that into our relationship. And he did it voluntarily, and he did it, followed through, and then he came and talked to us about it. That's when I'm like, wow, he really is willing to be coached. And that's when I was like, I breathed. That's when I'm like, okay, I guess. No, I'm like, I guess
It's a good guess.
No,
and good guess.
But it's not him. But it was
guess.
more me being willing to say I do with it, going like, I do. It was more like, no, I do, because I knew he was willing to be coached and willing to change continually. Not to sound. I know it sounds kind of harsh, but that's my tough, loving, nurturing way that's coming out.
Maybe one more thing I'd like to add on the ideals switching over to reality. For anybody on this call who has dated before, like really dated someone, and then you break up, and then someone points it out to you, and then you say, oh man, I can't believe I dated that person. I can pretty much guarantee you that you slept with that person. Because that's generally what happened, right? Like I've said it before, sex makes you stupid, right? Sex makes you stupid. I'll say it again, sex makes you stupid. And I believe sex is designed for marriage, because in marriage, sometimes things have to get numbed, and sex is great for that. So I think it's a tool, but sex outside of marriage makes you stupid because you don't see things that you should be seeing. You don't see red flags that you should be seeing. And then later on, when the relationship falls apart, like, oh man, I can't believe I dated that person. Yeah, but you were sleeping with that person, and that's why you were with that person, right? You're infatuated with that part of it because that part felt good. So sometimes your ideas and feelings you have don't transition into the long term and into marriage because it's not based on anything. It's based on the sand, and like a little bit of a water coming through will just wash it out. So I hope that answers your question, Braden.
Yeah, that really does. Oh, I'm just looking at myself. Opening this up to, I guess that was our last question. So just opening this up to any questions from people on the Zoom. Question from Dry said, how do you find, when you guys were talking about your mentors, how do you find your alternative mentors outside of your family, especially if your guys' parents weren't really involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, it's hard to find people that have fruit on the tree, but it is important to listen to people that have fruit on the tree. Like Nerissa mentioned earlier, like, like if you want to learn how to play basketball, do you go to your grandma or do you go to Michael Jordan, right? Like, well, you go to Michael Jordan because he's clearly good at basketball, right? So when you want to learn about a healthy marriage, do you take input from someone who is on their 7th marriage, or do you take input from someone who has a healthy marriage, right? So it all comes down to, like, is there fruit on the tree? And if there is fruit on the tree, then that person is qualified to talk about it. I know sometimes people get too hung up on the certified, like, oh, you didn't study this, so like you don't have a degree in this, so therefore you're not authorized to talk about it. If you want to know how to make babies, talk to Phil and Candace. They're really good at it, right? If you want to know how to have a strong marriage and go through crap to build a strong marriage, talk to Phil and Candace. They've gone through stuff, right? And they share it. They're not hiding what they've gone through. So listen to people who have done what it is that you want to achieve, whether that's in marriage or sports or finances or whatever it is. Look for people who have fruit on the tree and only listen to them. And don't worry, like Nerissa mentioned it earlier, everyone's going to have opinions. Everyone's going to say, oh, don't do this, don't do that. Dude, if you don't have fruit on the tree, I don't really care what you say.
I would just add to that. And as for the younger, like even before you're in the dating, or even before that, as a younger person, don't be afraid to go look for mentors in specific areas, right? It develops that muscle for you as a mentee to listen to a mentor, and also for you to figure out more what a mentor really does, right? For myself, that's why I was always looking for somebody. I had teachers or a teacher in elementary school that I looked up to, just as a teacher. I remember that in high school, I was looking so hard for one, and I was blessed by when we had a semi-strike, and I went to a teacher that I looked up to, only in the teacher capacity, but she referred me to a club coach, track coach, and so I went to him, and he coached me for the next 5 years. He's the one who led me into varsity, but he was the one where I gained so much wisdom from, but he was also somebody where I learned to submit to a mentor, if that makes sense, right? So this is where I knew how to put the time in. I knew the only way I was going to get his attention was if I showed up to practice every day for the 2-hour practice every day after school. And the only time is he didn't take crap. I wasn't allowed to complain. He helped me develop my work habit. He helped me develop, he's like, and he yelled at all of us he's like, this is not the time to be horsing around. He taught us the time to focus. He taught us the time to prepare for games. He taught us how to mentally prepare for game time, and why practice is so important, why you practice like you're in an actual game, right? So he taught us all these things where now looking back, I have been able to transition a lot of these skills I learned in that environment, being mentored in that environment, into my real life, right? Because it will do you lots of good as you get older and older, right? And as you go through different mentors, you'll see how people mentor differently, and you'll see as you get older too, you'll also understand why some people have a greater have more fruit on their tree, and others will have less fruit on their tree based on how they mentor, based on how they choose to live their lives, right? But that's what I would recommend, to start getting mentors in different areas. It could be at work. You could be an apprentice. It could be your boss, right? Everybody I worked with or worked for, like the last job I had before having kids, I always look at anybody that I was working with, as somebody who could mentor me in some way, shape, or form, right? In one area or another that they excelled in. It may not be an area that I'm looking to excel in, but they have something that I could learn from, right? That's the best gift you can give yourself as you look to anybody, even if it's somebody of the same age, right? Because everyone goes through life and sees life from a different perspective. So when you look at somebody else, I can learn something from them. Maybe it's just the way they talk. Maybe it's something that I don't want to develop that bad habit, right? And Harold and I talk a lot about this, where as I've identified stuff about my family, or as we're talking to stuff, and I'll be like, oh, this is what I picked up from my family, right? One of the biggest things we've shared here is about secrecy. I'm like, I don't want that. So, I'll share with them like, we have to, for example, I don't know, like call mom and dad separately than my sister. And I'll say it to Harold, I'm like, we're never doing that with our kids. So whenever any of that opportunity comes up with our kids, I'm like, no, there's no there's no whispering in our house. We all talk about everything together, right? And this has helped me identify what is healthy and what is not healthy moving forward, and what we want moving forward, the habits that we want to develop and with our kids as well.
Awesome. Just a couple more questions that we have here. Eshmer asked, what advice do you have for dating divorced people? And I'll combine that with this second question of, can you share your perspective on choosing well from previously failed marriage, and how going into a thriving one, were there ignored red flags in the first marriage? That made sense.
Yeah. I've never dated a divorced person.
That's right.
When you're dating a divorced person, I would assume that there's baggage, and you got to find out how was it ended, because there's different ways to ending a relationship. Is there kids involved? Was there infidelity? Was it financial issues? There's so many reasons for a marriage to fall apart. Like, you want to be able to have that clear understanding of what has happened, and then have clear expectations of what it is that you're looking for, and not just taking the surface level. Well, he believes in Jesus, so therefore, we're a match, right? Because we have the same belief. He believes in Jesus. Well, I shared before, right? Like the devil believes in Jesus. How is that working out for him, right? It has to be a little bit more on are you actually involved in your church? Are you praying? Are you studying the Bible? And like I said, the biggest test of all, are you actually giving money? Like is that a big deal for you? So like to bring it back to characters and to value. And I do believe that there's not one special person out there that is going to meet all the needs of your heart and soul. I think if you're waiting for that special person, you're going to be single for a long time. You can't just expect God to bring you someone, right? It's like you have to go out there and find, right? You can't just be sitting at home and waiting for God to drop someone off on your doorstep, right? You can't wait for God to tell you who to marry. I was looking at it earlier, and I haven't quite finished the thought, but I was taking notes on it earlier. Like, where in the Bible did that happen, right? Where in the Bible did God tell a person to marry a specific person? It was the angel that talked to Joseph about Mary, right? And Mary had already picked her. Right? He was just freaking out that she was pregnant, right? Nobody was buying the angel told me so story, right? Like, yeah, right, an angel, right? Hosea the prophet married a prostitute, but I don't think he was told to marry a specific prostitute, right? That was pretty much pick a hoe, any hoe, right? Adam and Eve, right? Like Adam and Eve, well, they were the only people on earth, right? Plus they were naked in the garden, right? What about Ruth and Boaz? We were doing that story with the kids just last week around this time, actually. But when you read the story, the whole thing was rigged by the mother-in-law from the get-go, right? It wasn't like Boaz thought that he found Ruth, but Ruth made sure that she was found, right? So anyway, I don't think that there's any magic to it. Again, like, you have to go back to the basics, your character, your values, and focus on God. And whether the person is divorced or not, if I've been divorced, right? I don't know if that was a hurdle for you.
Yes, no. Yes, I knew on paper he was divorced, but I was more curious to see how he handled it. And when the way as defined people who are divorced or being he wasn't divorced, he was it was his choice. That's where I saw how that's the importance of dating somebody, or considering somebody who's labeled divorce, as in he was I saw the efforts, or I knew of the efforts, and it wasn't him telling me, it was everyone else telling me the efforts he put into to try to restore that relationship before they were officially separated, before they had a divorce. I saw what he was willing to do after to mend the relationship. I saw what he was willing to do for himself to heal from it. And also, as he looked into us moving forward, what he was willing to do to take more precautions to make sure he wasn't bringing anything that he might not have seen or anybody else has seen by going to a professional to dig up anything else that might have been missed to make sure it was all cleared before we move forward into our marriage.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Due to time, we are going to have to wrap up here. I just wanted to thank Uncle Harold and Auntie Nerissa for taking the time. A lot of wisdom, which was really awesome. I have a lot of notes. And the last thing that you guys said, which was really key for me, because a lot of the times, I don't know about everyone else, but a lot of times you get in that mindset of God's going to place this person in my life, or God's going to find someone for me. But it's really about going out there and doing what Ruth did, and just placing yourself in the situation where you're just going in and getting it. You know what I mean? So, but thank you guys so much. We're gonna wrap up here. I'm gonna close with a word of prayer, and then we'll end it there. Everyone, just bow your heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you that we're all able to just take in all this knowledge and be blessed and be able to hopefully apply one or two things in our life at least. Thank you that you were with us today, and you were speaking through Uncle Harold and Auntie Nerissa. And I pray that you continue to bless their family and everyone else on this chat. And thank you that we're able to continue doing these YNA sessions and adding value and just creating an impact and reaching more people. And I pray that you continue to lead us in the right direction. In your name I pray, amen. Just to let you guys know once more, this was recorded, and it will be posted on our Crossing Youth YouTube. So thank you all for joining us.